Do you wanna have a hanging?
No!
Come on, let's check the news.
Beat it!
Do you wanna tell some dick jokes? And see if hell breaks loose?
Leave me alone!
I wish you weren't an a-hole. Please get your gun. We'll blow all the bad guys away. Do you wanna have a hanging? Come on, let's give it a try.
Shut up!
Ow, my eye.
What the hell?
Welcome back, ladies and gents, to Mighty Ride Junkies, and what I thought would be the final video for Not Scary Farm. However, there is just so much material to cover, I had to break it down to a 5-year span, rather than 10 like in my previous videos. So we can call this the second to last video. This is part 5, if you missed it from the title, so please check out the previous installment videos if you want to learn about the Scary Farm of old. If you're just here for these years and this is your first time watching the series, I only cover mazes that were in their final year. This saves me from mentioning the same maze 3 to 6 times. Continuing where we left off in the new decade of 2010, which saw 3 mazes fold. The first was Black Widow's Cavern, which began back in 2007. Black Widow's Cavern was the retheme for the Calico Mine Train. Calico Mine Train had been struggling to find a solid retheme for the ride that people actually enjoyed. Even with the change in animatronics and decorations, the ride more or less felt the same every year. However, the retheme always continued because it served as a crowd buffer. But after this season, Scary Farm released a statement advising they wouldn't be bringing back the haunted Calico Mine Train to Scary Farm for some time. Basically, they felt like they weren't putting their full creativity into it and were using it more so to fill space. Club Blood served from 2008 to 2010. The maze was considered cancelled even though it was getting a high number of park goers going through the maze. Club Blood was located in a very key spot. Most of the mazes are scattered throughout the park with the exception to 3 to 4 of them depending on the year that you go. They are bunched up together near the entrance of Ghost Town Ghost Rider and essentially near the entrance of the park. This is usually one of the first places maze goers go when the event opens, as you can knock out 4 mazes fairly quickly and without walking too far. This could explain Club Blood's numbers. However, its rating wasn't the same. The maze isn't anything crazy, it sets up a techno stripper nightclubby thingy, except all the entertainment are vampires gorging out on blood. In 2008, during the maze's opening year, most maze reviewers and experienced Halloween junkies alike ranked this maze 4th out of the 13 mazes within the park that year. By 2010, it was ranked dead last. It very much was one of those mazes that was cool the first time you went through it, then kind of the maze you have to go through just so you can say you did all the mazes. The final maze was Labyrinth, which opened alongside Club Blood in 2008. This maze might have been entertaining to someone who was experiencing a Halloween haunt event or even Scary Farm for the first time. But for the annual maze goer or the seasoned veteran, there were 2 very noticeable problems with this maze. The first, most mazes follow a story. Now while that might not be noticeable to the maze goer, it helps outline the direction to make the maze for the creators. A maze with a good story tends to be a maze that lasts a while. Labyrinth didn't have a story. In fact, it was incredibly confusing trying to decipher the story for this maze, which apparently was purposely done. Labyrinth was meant to be a story that the maze goer creates themselves from what they see, thus giving every person a different experience. The second problem, the maze had been recycled galore. While all mazes usually have something recycled in them from a previous maze from years before, usually it's changed just enough and blended in with its new maze that you won't notice it unless you have a keen attention to detail. This was not the case. Literally, the maze took designs from Bloody Bayou, Lure of the Vampire, Domination of the Dead, Beowulf, and Curse of the Spider to name a few, and just attempted to mesh everything together to make one maze. and it didn't work. However, 2010 wasn't all bad, and in fact was a pretty highlighted year to celebrate. 2010 finally brought the lawman and the comedic hangman together for a pair that would last for almost a decade, officially hunting down everything pop culture and hanging the worst of the worst until they are dead. This year it was Justin Bieber, for being a glorified one-man boy band. Yet, he would somehow survive and return in later years. 2010 marked the 38th annual Halloween event for Scary Farm, officially making it the longest-running Halloween event ever in North America. On to 2011 with Invasion Beneath, which was the retheme for the Calico Mine Train in its one and only year. Invasion Beneath centered on you going near the core of the earth and you're suddenly being chased by the creatures that inhabit it. Unfortunately, this became one of those less memorable rethemes. Nothing than a glorified strobe light show with the rest of the ride in darkness. Doll Factory was a fan favorite that began way back in 2007. The maze focused on a crazed man obsessed with dolls, kidnapping people and turning them into dolls. The maze goer then walks through his factory and meets all his victims. While this maze was amazing, it was definitely time for its retirement. While the maze had detailed backdrops and decorations to really make you feel like you were in the environment, after about 5 times through, you will notice nothing really changed throughout the years, and the maze became predictable. I would compare it to one of your favorite horror movies. Not the favorite, but one of them. You love it, but it doesn't have the same effect it once had the first time you watched it. One thing that really stood out about this maze was the scare actors. No matter the day of the week, time of day, or year you went, they were 100% in character, and while that may not sound like an achievement in itself, you'd be hard-pressed to see this in any other maze throughout the country. Stalkers began in 2008, and I'm not sure why this maze lasted as long as it did. The premise of the story is very simple. You walk through a house, then a backyard cornfield where a bunch of crazies try and kill you. This felt like a slightly better version of your typical scary corn maze. It took me 2 years of going through this maze before I even realized the scare actors are supposed to be scarecrows, and the scarecrows are the ones trying to kill you. Guess I'm just slow. Sleepy Hollow Mountain was the retheme for the Timber Mountain log ride that started last year. I'm against the majority here, as when this was first announced there was a lot of buzz and excitement for it. After writing it though, a lot of reviewers called it a letdown. Some of these reviewers were extremely vocal and had a lot of readers, which resulted in this retheme shutting down after 2 years. The story focused on the story of Sleepy Hollow, featuring an awesome animatronic of the Headless Horseman. I thought Sleepy Hollow was better than some future rethemes for this ride, but the majority would disagree with me. Lockdown, the Asylum, began in 2009 and served as a sequel to one of Scary Farm's most successful mazes, the Asylum, which was mentioned in previous videos. While it fell short of its predecessor, it still was enjoyable. The maze focused on a federal institute for the insane. When you enter, the inmates have started a riot and you get front row tickets. To be honest, this felt more like a remake than a sequel to the original maze, and we all know how remakes are. The Hanging had an interesting year. The show pushed the envelope like never before with dark humor, with the likes of poking fun at the death of Amy Winehouse, showing the royal British family being nothing more than horn dogs, and Osama bin Laden having a dance number with SpongeBob SquarePants. You would think when the show came under fire, it would have been about these topics, but no, cancer culture didn't exist yet. Instead, it had to do with what was hung at the end of the show. You see, that year, a singer, and I'm using quotation fingers here, named Rebecca Black came out with a song called Friday that was quickly recognized as being one of the most annoying songs ever made. Black was hung near the beginning of the Halloween season for ruining music for the youth. But Black is from Irvine, California, which made her an Orange County native, the same county that Knott's Berry Farm resides in. After a sea of complaints and anti-bullying circuits defending the local high schooler, The Hanging replaced Black about 2 weeks in with Charlie Sheen, who was hung for being, well, Charlie Sheen. Ironically, in 2016, the Black family finally commented on the spoof. Rebecca had stated she understood the humor around it and remarked publicity was publicity. Rebecca's own mother had actually spoken to the Scary Farm team before the show had even debuted. She stated while she was not thrilled the show was hanging her daughter, she understood it was meant to be a humorous take and there was no such thing as bad publicity. So respect to the Black family for knowing how to take a joke. Moving on to 2012, or better known as the 40th anniversary for Knott's Scary Farm. Evil Dead finally made an appearance at a major Halloween theme event. The one and done retheme for the Timber Mountain log ride had some great ideas, but the execution was a bit lackluster. The Book of the Dead made an appearance at the beginning of the ride and line queue, and once again near the end of the actual ride. One of the biggest problems with most Evil Dead themed attractions is getting someone that looks like the main man from the Evil Dead franchise, Ash Williams, played by actor Bruce Campbell. Campbell has such a unique look, it's hard to find lookalikes. Scary Farm got around this by making you, the writer, Ash Williams. The beginning of the ride, you do get to see hints from scenes from the first two Evil Deads, but after that you'll get hit with strobe lights, tunnel light effects, and scare actors. Being a massive Evil Dead fan, I was just happy it finally got some love in the horror theme park world, but it is rated near the bottom for the log ride's rethemes. Terror of London began in 2009 and finally came to an end, but this maze is one of my favorites, and you'll be hearing that quite a bit in this video, but it also was one of the favorites for the fan base. Terror of London focused on the real-life Jack the Ripper murders, and you got to walk through a detailed Victorian England and throughout all the crime scenes. This maze has been placed in the top 10 for Scary Farm's best mazes of all time. Virus Z began in 2010. While this virus was first mentioned in the quarantine maze, maze-goers find themselves in a high school that has turned into an emergency shelter. Oh, and it's been overrun by zombies. I have to give the maze credit, the entrance really gave high expectations for it, but once you get past the opening, there really isn't anything more creative and it's just simple designs. But those zombies were clearly 28 days later zombies because those mofos could move. Uncle Bobo's Big Top of the Bazaar, that's a mouthful, began in 2009 and had gotten a reputation for being one of Scary Farm's best carnival-themed mazes. The maze was a cross from their own maze, Killer Clown College, with hints of the movie Killer Clowns from Outer Space. The music choice for this maze was exceptional and definitely contributed to making this maze a huge hit during its inaugural season. Dia de los Muertos debuted with Uncle Bobo in 2009. The maze centered around a traditional Day of the Dead festival in an isolated town in Mexico. However, the maze-goer is the wandering traveler, and upon stumbling this little town, they would quickly realize all the undead are about and are quite evil. The maze was exciting and different during its first 2 years, but with no upgrades throughout the years, the maze quickly became stale by its conclusion of this season. Fallout Shelter began in 2010 and centered around a bomb shelter that was meant to withstand the blast of an atomic bomb. While it did survive the blast, it couldn't withstand the radiation. The maze-goer would get a tour of the shelter and all the things it had done to people and animals within it. While the maze was enjoyable, I don't remember this maze being a huge standout for me. It should be noted the maze was advertised to be 3D, but even looking back at archives, I really can't see anything that would make the 3D stand out. The 40th anniversary hanging show is by far my favorite hanging show and filled with pop culture. The lawman and the hangman find themselves in the Hunger Games, defending their district, which was District 13 3/4, and found themselves going against the Avengers, the Expendables, and while getting help from their sponsor, Christian Bale's Batman, which led to one of my favorite scenes.
Fires off her from I can't understand what you're saying. What the hell? I can't understand what you're saying. Somebody help me out here. I can't understand you either. What's worse is using that stupid deep Batman voice.
Hey, I just talked to Slurry. She said he need reinforcements.
We are the Expendables, dude! Get out of here!
This year, they hung Kristen Stewart for her amazing acting ability.
Kristen Stewart, you are charged with the crime of being a horrible actress.
What do you mean? I am a wonderful actress with a wide range of emotion. This is me playing sad, happy, thoughtful, inquisitive.
All right, that's enough.
Okay.
However, the cherry on top was right before the hangman was about to pull the lever. Robert Pattinson came out to let the world know he was pulling the lever due to Stewart cheating on him. Great show this year. In honor of the 40th year, the hanging was put aside at the midnight showing to bring back the traditional hanging from the early years of Scary Farm, where they hung a woman believing to be a witch, who of course turned out to be the infamous Green Witch. And from that moment on, and for years to follow, the Green Witch would wander the park with her goons. On to 2013 with Delirium, which began back in 2011. Delirium served as a conclusion to the Asylum trilogy, with Asylum being the first, Lockdown Asylum being the sequel, and Delirium serving as the conclusion. But you never would have known that if you didn't look into the maze. The story of the maze centered around the mind of someone who was trapped in an asylum, the same asylum maze-goers went through from years before. I will admit, it took me a couple times going through this maze before I realized the maze goer was supposed to be the asylum inmate and we were going through our own mind. There is a lot of twists and turns within this maze and a lot of shock value is used. The first time you go through this maze, it's spectacular. The second time and beyond, you start to notice its flaws, mainly because there's no real narrative attached to it. That being said, Delirium tends to be in everyone's top 3 mazes of all time within the Scary Farm community. In 2011, Not Scary Farm debuted one of my all-time favorite mazes, Endgames. Endgames to me was perfect. My heaven if I could not be dramatic enough. Endgames focused on a post-apocalyptic world that centered around gladiator matches, drinking, and heavy metal. Just picture the movie Waterworld and the movie Mad Max having a love child, who then have a child with the Fallout games, and the only people who get to see this kid are heavy metal bands, and you'll get a better picture of what Endgames is. I absolutely love this maze, and it never got old to me for the 50 plus times I went through it. It also, in my humble opinion, had the best soundtrack than any other maze. Next time you're watching Russell Crowe's Gladiator or Spartacus, during a fight scene, just turn the audio off and start blasting Pantera. It will be the closest you'll get to experiencing Endgames if you never got to go through it. Mirror Mirror was only around for this year, and it's obvious why. This was one of those mazes that was a great idea, but horrible execution. The maze was literally an actual maze that tricked you with hundreds of mirrors, and it did a very, very good job at it. So much so, the scare actors weren't really scare actors. They spent more time guiding people to the right path to get closer to the exit because the maze was that well done to confuse a lot of people, which goes into its major weakness. Fire codes only let so many people in the maze at once, and its small square footage only allowed about 25 people in at a time, not including staff. So the line queue was a nightmare. I had a front of the line pass and still waited about an hour for this maze, and it was a Thursday. God help those who try to do this on the weekend. This maze was caught between a rock and a hard place because it would have done way better as a pay extra to enter maze. Personally, I would have been upset if I had paid extra to do this because at the end of the day, all it was a bunch of mirrors. The long-running Slaughterhouse finally came to an end this season after being around since 2008. Making it one of the longest running mazes for Scary Farm. The storyline of the maze was nothing special, a bunch of Backerwood hicks using human flesh for their barbecued restaurant. However, the actual maze itself was pretty good. You'd get a tour from the front of the restaurant to the back of the house to see all the victims either being dismembered or being prepared for their next customer, which really made me wonder who they decided would be a customer and who would be a victim. This has to be one of the goriest mazes I've ever walked through in any Halloween theme park that I can recall. The 2013 hanging focused on Hollywood officially out of ideas and only focusing on remakes and sequels. The lawman is tasked with finding the person responsible for the lack of any good ideas. This year, there were 2 hangmen, the hangman and the hangman's son. Now, I've done a lot of research to try and figure out why the original actor who betrayed the hangman since the character's introduction was calling it quits. Still not sure if he retired or moved on to something else. But after this year, he had a couple guest appearances in the 2014 show before disappearing completely. Eventually, the three amigos would realize that Miley Cyrus was this year's cursed, and she was hung from the neck until dead. 2014 saw the end of a legend, Domination of the Damned, the only maze to come back from its original retirement. The maze first opened way back in 1996, before taking a break after the 1999 season. In 2012, for the 40th anniversary, the maze was brought back and stayed by popular demand until this year, putting the maze goer through a castle of undead vampires thirsty for your blood. The maze very much brought back the old school Not Scary Farm feel, focusing more so on stimulating visuals rather than scares. While the maze was deeply loved in its original run, its return had mixed reviews. While the longtime Scary Farm junkie loved it, the new or one-and-done parkgoer didn't really care for it. And I believe this is mainly because when you compare it to the state-of-the-art mazes it had to go against in its second run, Domination of the Damned seemed very outdated. In 2013, Not Scary Farm opened a pay extra maze called Trapped. The maze was way more intimate with the maze goer than any other maze Scary Farm has ever done. A group, no bigger than 10, would go into the maze and each room played out a scene or a task that the group had to perform. From eating bugs, passing through live rats, claustrophobia tests, separated from your group in pitch black, and many, many more. The original Trapped served as a great experience to have at least once, but its high price avoided the repeat once you had done it. In 2014, Scary Farm changed the name from Trapped to Trapped Lock and Key. Unfortunately, very few people got to experience it, including myself. What's worse is because of its short run, there is very little information about the 2014 version. However, what we do know is one of the rooms focused on a mentally insane person. There is a lot of foundations that focus on funding and helping the mentally ill that didn't take too fondly of Scary Farm making their character within the maze horrific and crazy. Informing the park they were hurting the image they had been destroying for years, Scary Farm responded by closing Trapped Lock and Key early within that season. After 2014, Trapped never returned. The Witch's Keep began in 2013 to keep going with the theme of the return of the Green Witch. It was the retheme for the Calico Mine Train. Unfortunately, scare actors had massively been removed from the ride, leaving you with just puppets and animatronics to worry about. The maze was nothing more than a crowd buffer. If there is one thing I have to give the hanging credit for, it's its ability to predict the tide of the current political climate. You'll see the theme as this video continues. But before cancel culture really had any traction, the hanging took a stab at it. The hanging had been cancelled due to its graphic nature, and S.H.I.E.L.D., yeah, you heard that right, had been tasked with making sure the hanging doesn't continue, or the lawman and hangman will face criminal liability. But after some convincing, a musical number poking fun at Disney's Frozen, the lawman agrees to help the hangman find the person who screwed society so much this year. The topic, mainly focusing on racism, the biggest offender, to much of the crowd's delight, was former Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling, for, well, being a racist. 2015 saw 4 mazes end their runs. Forevermore began in 2013 and focused on bringing the poems of Edgar Allan Poe to life in a more modern time. The maze was pretty memorable, bringing to life most of his best poems, but what really added to the depth of the beautiful and creative set designs was the narration of the poems in the background as you walk through the scene. Pinocchio Unstrung began in 2012, and it is up there as one of my all-time favorite mazes for Scary Farm. I'm usually not into line cue sound bites. They really do nothing for me, but this and El Cucuy of Universal Studios Hollywood Horror Nights are the exception. Pinocchio Unstrung takes the classic tale of Pinocchio and gives it a different ending. Pinocchio was never turned into a real boy because the blue fairy lied to him. Now we have a grown wooden puppet whose only objective is to destroy anything human. The eerie monologue by Pinocchio on the line cue really painted a picture of how angry and full of hate he was. Maze goers were then taken to a very familiar town of Italy. They slowly find out all the humans are gone, or slowly being turned into wooden puppets themselves in a very gruesome way. Even some of the puppets themselves are scared of the master of puppets. The grand finale, you faced off against Pinocchio himself, and you get to see how the years have made him so twisted and ugly. My Bloody Clementine was a one-year wonder retheme for the Calico Mine Train. The story focused on a girl who died within the mines, and now her evil spirit haunts them. However, once on the ride, you would be hard-pressed to find her, or really any spirits, or really anything scary within these mines. Black Magic began in 2013 and focused on the times of the famous magician, the Great Houdini. Maze goers would see a lot of Houdini's tricks up close and personal, however, with failed results, which led to a pretty good spectacle of eye candy for horror junkies. The set pieces were pretty top-notch here too. That being said, don't expect any real scares. This maze focused more on shock and psychological scare, yet the maze remains as a favorite among Scary Farm junkies. The hanging returned with an added hangman, or in this case a hangwoman. The new character was actually pretty ballsy in a character sense, and she quickly stole the show with her over-the-line humor. This year, Ariana Grande was hung for I Hate America Lick a Donut incident that took place in Lake Elsinore, California. Unfortunately, this may have been the last good hanging show until the show was ultimately canceled, but more on that in a different video. We are down to the last 5 years, ladies and gentlemen. If you like this video, give it a like or subscribe. Let your friends know about Mighty Ride Junkies because it helps me out a lot. And until then, take care and be safe.